It's time once again for the great annual debate. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has announced the nominees for the class of 2021, and the mix is, well, as polarizing as ever. Coming up next, I'll share my thoughts on this year's nominees, and I really want to hear your thoughts too. Rock Hall 2021, right now on Track by Track. Hey everybody, my name is Kyle, and this is Track by Track, music reviews, news, and commentary. Thanks for tuning in today, and if this is your first time here, please take a second to click subscribe so you won't miss future reviews and more. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. In theory, it's a great idea. Honoring the musical acts that have most strongly influenced both craft and culture is a very noble concept. In execution, though, it's inherently flawed. After all, how do we judge art? And how do we determine what acts are more worthy than others to be included? How do we balance the need to recognize older legacy acts with the ever-growing list of younger acts reaching eligibility age annually? How do we define rock and roll for the ages when a genre with its roots in rhythm and blues 70 years ago continues to evolve into forms its founders never dreamed possible? These are the kinds of questions that arise every year when the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame announces its new batch of nominees. Among this year's 16 nominees, we have one act that's receiving their first nomination but has been eligible for induction for over 30 years. Yet two other first-time nominees are getting a nod in their very first year of eligibility. When you consider the fact that these younger nominees haven't even been active for as many years as a legacy act has been snubbed, it's easy to see why the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is such a hotly debated institution. But not by me. There's a Stanley Kubrick movie you've probably heard of and hopefully seen called Dr. Strangelove. To borrow from the subtitle of that film, let's just say I've learned to stop worrying and love the Rock Hall. Well, love is too strong a word, but the point is, I don't want to get so caught up in the debate that it isn't any fun anymore. Because it's rock and roll. It's supposed to be fun. And for me, and hopefully for you, it's fun to speculate about who I think may or may not get inducted, about who might win the fan vote, and about who should get used to repeating the phrase, "It's an honor just to be nominated." So let's talk about this year's nominees. Once again, we have 16 acts all vying for induction. As far as we know, 6 of them will end up being selected as the class of 2021. As always, there's a mix of first-time nominees as well as previously nominated acts, one of whom has just received their 6th nomination. And out of the 16 acts on this year's list, only 2 are repeat offenders from last year's list. As for genres, we've got rock, punk, metal, alternative, singer-songwriter, R&B, and yes, rap and hip-hop. And on top of all that, we have the most diverse selection of nominees ever from the Rock Hall, with female acts making up nearly half the list. Alright, so let's look at this year's nominees, starting with the 2 acts receiving nominations in their first year of eligibility. To absolutely no one's surprise, Foo Fighters will be fighting for a spot in the Rock Hall's class of 2021. Frontman Dave Grohl actually opened the 2020 Rock Hall's virtual ceremony, almost acting as a sort of host for the show. Now the Rock Hall is paying him back for that favor with a first-year nomination nod. If the band earns induction, it will of course be Grohl's second Rock Hall nod following Nirvana's induction in 2014, also a first year of eligibility induction. The other act receiving a Rock Hall nomination in their first year of eligibility is also not surprising, although far more controversial. Jay-Z has been one of hip-hop's driving forces for 25 years with a huge fan base that transcends the genre of rap. His impact on popular music in general and hip-hop in specific has certainly made him an odds-on favorite for early induction into the Rock Hall. But a Jay-Z nomination and induction is certain to have many rock music purists rolling their eyes. Moving on, we have a group of acts also receiving their first Rock and Roll Hall of Fame nominations, although certainly not in their first year of eligibility. The 2 most high-profile first-time nominees, I think, are Carole King and Tina Turner. Both of these women have actually been inducted previously for their partnerships with men, but neither as solo performers. Tina Turner was inducted as part of Ike and Tina Turner, but this marks her first nomination as a solo artist. I think the honor is long overdue, and that Turner's impact on music on her own has far surpassed what she achieved as part of a duo. Meanwhile, Carole King's previous and well-deserved induction was as part of a songwriting duo with Jerry Goffin. Now she's finally being recognized for her massive impact as a singer-songwriter, and indeed on the 50th anniversary year of her landmark album Tapestry. Of course, if either King or Turner are inducted, they will join Stevie Nicks as the only women to have twice earned Rock Hall induction. Other women enjoying their first Rock Hall nominations this year are Dionne Warwick, Mary J. Blige, and the Go-Go's. Of that group, Warwick's nomination is the longest incoming. She's been eligible for a shocking 32 years now. Meanwhile, the Go-Go's have only been waiting 15 years for their first nomination. Those delays kind of make Mary J. Blige's 3-year wait seem utterly trivial. Rounding out the list of first-time nominees, we have Afrobeat legend Fela Kuti and heavy metal icons Iron Maiden. Kuti's nomination may be the year's most surprising. He's certainly not as well known as the other acts on this year's list, but he's long been a global music influence, including on artists and Rock Hall members like Paul Simon and Peter Gabriel. Meanwhile, heavy metal fans can rejoice in the nod for Iron Maiden, seemingly taking the obligatory metal nominee slot held by Judas Priest last year. Hard to believe this is the band's first nomination, but then again, the Rock Hall has a long history of all but ignoring the genre. The rest of this year's nominees are no strangers to the process. They've all received multiple nominations and been passed over in prior years. Of this year's group, the act holding the record for the most nominations is LL Cool J. As one of hip-hop's pioneering voices from the early 80s, LL Cool J was nominated in his first year of eligibility in 2010. This year marks his 6th nomination. And although Chaka Khan's solo nomination this year is her 3rd such nod, she's also been nominated twice, with Rufus featuring Chaka Khan, including last year, so this will be her 5th overall nomination. Also celebrating, so to speak, their 3rd Rock Hall nominations are the alt-rock band Rage Against the Machine and pioneering singer-songwriter-producer Todd Rundgren. Both of these acts have been popular among Rock Hall voters in recent years. In fact, this is Rundgren's 3rd consecutive year being nominated, and he's one of just 2 acts on this year's list, making a return from last year's list. The other being Chaka Khan, but without Rufus. And rounding out the list of multiple nominees, each receiving their 2nd Rock Hall nods, are punk rock legends the New York Dolls, quirky synth-pop rockers Devo, and UK singer-songwriter Kate Bush. Alright, now, I've been covering the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame here on the channel for a few years, and during that time, I've seen some trends in terms of how you, the audience, feel about some of these acts. If the track-by-track audience was picking the winners, 3 of this year's nominees would be sure things for induction. Kate Bush is someone whose music I've always enjoyed, but hasn't been high on my list for the Rock Hall. Nevertheless, I've seen an enormous amount of support for her in the comments on my previous videos. I think a lot of you will be happy to see her on this year's list. And then there's Iron Maiden. As I said before, heavy metal is criminally underrepresented in the Rock Hall, and many fans were disappointed not to see Judas Priest inducted last year. I've definitely heard louder support for Priest, but Iron Maiden is mentioned often as well. I expect metal fans to rally behind them pretty hard this year. But the act I hear the most comments about, without a doubt, is Todd Rundgren. I don't mean this in any kind of negative way, but I am truly shocked at the overwhelming level of support from you guys for Rundgren. And I do respect the guy a ton, but I've said it before, and I'll say it again, Todd Rundgren has arguably had a greater impact on music behind the scenes than as a performer. He's wildly innovative and probably one of rock's greatest producers of all time. He absolutely deserves to be inducted, if only based on those merits. But I think it's a harder sell when it comes to Todd Rundgren as a performer. I've also talked about Rock Hall snubs in the past, and I'm thrilled to see 2 acts from my snub list earn their first nominations this year. As I mentioned earlier, Tina Turner and Carole King are, in my opinion, overdue for induction as solo performers. But there's something else interesting happening here that I only hinted at a few minutes ago. With a record number of women on the ballot this year, clearly we're seeing more gender diversity than ever. But for both Turner and King, it is an opportunity to recognize two women for their accomplishments on their own and not in partnership with a man. Of course, if you know anything about Ike Turner, you know Tina Turner was certainly not an equal partner in that relationship. Carole King's professional and marital relationship with Jerry Goffin was far less controversial, but unquestionably, when she went from writing other people's songs as Goffin and King to singing her own material under her own name, she truly cemented her status as a music legend. As far as making predictions about who will actually be inducted this year is concerned, I think there's at least one sure thing, and that's Foo Fighters. Everyone expected they'd get a nomination in their first year of eligibility, and I think most people expected them to be walk-ins as well. Dave Grohl has arguably been one of the most prominent personalities in music for a number of years, and predominantly as an actual advocate for music rather than any tabloid nonsense. He's essentially an ambassador for all things rock, and for that, I expect the members of the Rock Hall won't hesitate to grant him his second induction. As much as Foo Fighters are a sure thing for induction, there's at least two acts nominated this year that I think are sure things not to get inducted. Kate Bush has a passionate and loyal fan base, no doubt about it, but the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has a tendency to skew pretty strongly toward acts that have been more successful in America. In the US, many would see her as a one-hit wonder, but Bush's popularity is far greater in the UK. Consequently, I don't see her getting in this year, or possibly ever, I hate to say. Then there's Fela Kuti. As I said earlier, definitely influential, but ultimately I think he's too obscure to make the cut. I won't be surprised if this is his one and only nomination, and that this is the extent of his Rock Hall recognition. The rest of the list is a bit of a toss-up. There's a decent case to be made for most of the nominees, but with the clear emphasis on diversity this year, I think Carole King and Tina Turner are both likely to finally be inducted as solo artists. And I don't just mean diversity in terms of gender representation. Obviously, Tina Turner injects some racial diversity into the mix, but also King and Turner bring diversity in age. The Rock Hall always tries to induct a mix of legacy acts and newer acts, and these two definitely check the legacy boxes requirement. And honestly, more than any other acts on the nominees list this year, these are the two that most make me say, how are they not in the Rock Hall yet? I also have a feeling that the voters are starting to recognize the fact that heavy metal is criminally underrepresented in the Rock Hall. It's great that Metallica was inducted back in 2009, but the fact that their forebearers have been snubbed for so long is a glaring oversight. I'm guessing the Rock Hall will course correct a bit this year by putting Iron Maiden through. And not to delve back into the what is rock and roll debate again, but Iron Maiden is one of the few 2021 nominees that actually, rocks. And following that train of thought, let's talk about R&B and hip-hop. The Rock Hall has made a point of inducting acts from those genres pretty consistently for a number of years now, and I expect them to continue that practice in 2021. This year, I feel like it's a battle between Jay-Z and LL Cool J. Between those two, I have a feeling the voters will go with LL Cool J. As I said before, he's been nominated more times than anyone else on the list. Meanwhile, this is both Jay-Z's first nomination and first year of eligibility. With Foo Fighters already holding down a year one induction, I doubt the Rock Hall will want to skew that young for two inductees. Jay-Z will get in, but not this year. And finally, assuming the Rock Hall goes with 6 inductees again, I'm thinking the honor finally goes to Todd Rundgren. I think he's probably seen his case for induction strengthened over the past few years, possibly swaying some of the voting members. Plus, he's a musician's musician, and I think a lot of Rock Hall members probably respect that more than commercial success. And when we look at the roster of acts I'm already predicting this year, that's an impressive marquee lineup. Todd Rundgren would be a somewhat obscure choice to much of the general public, and I think the Rock Hall likes to toss in curveballs like that periodically. But what about the fan vote? I think it is fair to say the fan vote probably has very little impact on who ultimately gets inducted. In most years past, the fan vote winners have all been acts that few music fans would have objected to being inducted. They're usually obvious choices that the Rock Hall members probably would have voted for anyway. But last year, when Dave Matthews Band won the fan vote, they did not ultimately get inducted. In fact, among the top 5 fan vote acts, only one, the Doobie Brothers, ended up getting inducted, and they came in third. This year, I have a strong feeling the fan vote will align pretty closely with how the Rock Hall members would be voting anyway. In fact, I'm betting Foo Fighters will end up as the fan vote winners, and they were already a sure thing. So to recap, here are my predictions for the acts I think will be inducted as the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame class of 2021, starting with Foo Fighters, Iron Maiden, Carole King, LL Cool J, Todd Rundgren, and Tina Turner. Now, if you want to make your voice heard, be sure to participate in the online fan vote. You can find that at vote.rockhall.com. The final voting results will be announced in May, and the top 5 vote earners will go on the official fan ballot to be tallied with the member vote. The final list of the 2021 Rock Hall inductees will then be announced later that same month. As for the induction ceremony, no date has been set for that yet, though organizers are targeting October or November and are anticipating it once again being a live event, unlike 2020's virtual induction ceremony. As usual, the ceremony will air on both HBO and HBO Max streaming and is planned to be broadcast as a live event. Of course, 2020 was also supposed to be live for the first time ever, so cross your fingers. Meanwhile, what are your thoughts on this year's list of nominees? Is there anyone you think has a lock on being inducted? Or are there acts you think don't quite deserve the honor? Who is an act that got snubbed this year that you think should be on the ballot? How do you feel about rap and hip-hop going into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? And are you one of those who thinks the whole thing is just a sham anyway? Let me know all your thoughts down in the comments below. Once again, my name's Kyle, and this has been Track by Track. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, plus check out some of these other videos below that I think you might also enjoy. And of course, be sure to click subscribe, because true music fans always want new releases the day they come out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.